In this video, I'm going to teach you my framework to mastering Spanish grammar as fast as possible. Here's how I expounded in the beginning of my Spanish learning journey.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español.
Y ahora puedo hablar con fluidez. Puedo tener conversaciones con nativos, puedo hablar como con fluidez, puedo decir lo que quiera y me gusta hablar en español. Y sí, en este video voy a enseñarte cómo aprender la gramática de español. Originally, when I started learning Spanish, it came from wanting to be the best in my class because everyone in my class has made it a trend to start learning Spanish using these apps. And so my idea was to find the best app and to become essentially the best one in my class. And so I spent hours like researching online different apps and different methods to learn. And I found this app called Language Transfer. And essentially it's this app where he explains grammar. He goes through the entire grammar of Spanish and he explains it in a way that is very comprehensible and understandable. And so I took that course and it blew my mind in the first like 5-10 lessons. And I started telling everyone in my class about it. And my friend literally wanted to gatekeep it, that's how good it was. But the reason why Language Transfer worked so well, I think, is that he explained the why behind the language. Like, he didn't just tell you, this is what it is, go memorize it. No. He actually was against memorization. And this was different to what everyone else has said, because usually in Spanish in school, you had like this big table and graph of all the conjugation, and you're expected to memorize every single one. And then you find irregular verbs, and then you're thinking like, what is this? Because it's all irregular, none of it makes sense. And so obviously in the beginning, you get very confused because you're like, what are you gonna do? You have to memorize all these different patterns. With Language Transfer, he didn't tell you to memorize, but he explained sort of why things happen and the rules behind them. And the reason why this was so nice was because, for example, in the first 5-10 lessons, he explained that there are words in Spanish that you can convert from English just because of the Latin roots. Now, the reason why that is so important that he explains the Latin roots is because then it makes sense. So he explained the rule that words that end with AL in Spanish are the same in English. So words that end with AL in English are the exact same in Spanish, but with Spanish vowels. So normal is normal, formal is formal, personal is personal, etc. And so that one rule, for example, he added on to it and said, and words that have this li, like normal li, it becomes mente. So normally would be normalmente, personally would be personalmente, formally would be formalmente. And he explained that these are all just rules switched between languages because of the Latin roots. And that one example just sort of taught me like, wow, this is so much easier than I thought. And it conceptualized it. It made it into a rule rather than something I need to memorize. Though Language Transfer is a great course, not everything in the course is necessarily perfect in my opinion. But it is fine though, it is a free course and it's compared to everyone else's like methods of learning, it is definitely one of the best. If you want to learn any type of Spanish for free, definitely a great course to take. So I'm going to take you through now my framework. I probably put in the title. I call it the 3 W's. And this is what I mean. This is the main sauce. This is like how to exactly get down Spanish grammar. The 3 W's stand for what, where, and why. Let me explain. Spanish grammar, okay? Grammar is just firstly what the word is, okay? Let's take a sentence like estaba hablando con ella, right? Estaba hablando con ella. First, you gotta know what the words are, okay? We need to know what hablando con ella, we need to know all the words. That's the what, just what are they? What do they mean? Next, you need to know the placement of those words. Where do they go, right? Why do we say, for example, lo quiero hacer? Or quiero hacerlo. Or why do we have to say te veo, right? I see you, te veo. Why is that te beforehand, right? That's the rule, by the way. So first is just getting the what down, and then second one is getting the where down. Those are technically all you need to know to make sentences, right? All a sentence is just a word, like words, and the placement of those words. That's it. That's the only real difference between English and Spanish. However, the last one I put, and this is something that most people miss, and that is the why. When I say why, I mean the rule, okay? Let me explain this. On one hand, you just memorize te veo, okay? You know that te means you, but you don't know all the U's that it means, right? But you just memorize that it means you. And also you just memorize that veo means I see. And you have no idea why this te comes before veo. You have no idea, but you just memorized it. Meaning, you have now learned one thing, one phrase in Spanish. And this is the terrible thing about all these goddamn YouTube videos. Top 10 phrases that you need to know in Spanish. It pisses me off because you don't need to know 10 phrases. You need to know a few set of rules. And then once you know a few set of rules, you know the entirety of those phrases. You don't need to memorize every single phrase. And then you don't know how to use the different phrases in different ways. It's extremely stupid, I'm gonna be honest. When we say understanding the why, it means understanding. Okay, firstly, te doesn't just mean you, but it also means to you and yourself. That's one thing. Secondly, I know that veo means I see or I'm seeing, not just I see. That's a rule, that's a framework, that's a why, okay? There's a reason for that. There's context to that, there's a background. If you just directly translate veo as I see, you're not getting the rest down. You're not understanding the entire word. And then there's a rule to why the te comes before the veo, because these words like te, se, le, lo, etc., they always have to come before the changed verb. And veo is a changed verb, so we put it before. That's a rule, that's a why. Instead of being clueless on why certain things happen in Spanish, knowing why they happen is the most important thing ever. And not only that, knowing like the explanation behind them. For example, we got estaba, right? You couldn't memorize just estaba, but the understanding why we got there, okay? All you need in Spanish really is the what and the where. All you need to know is what the word is, estaba, and then you need to know where the placement of the different words go, okay? Te quiero decir una cosa, okay? Te quiero decir una cosa, for example. All there is just what there is with the different words and then the placements of those words. Let's go back to estaba, for example. If you just memorize estaba, congratulations, you got one word. But there's a rule there, there's a why. Why do we get estaba? Well, we get it from the verb estar, and then there's a rule that we take off the ar and put aba to get he, she, it, and you formal. That's a rule. Now that you know the why, you don't just know estaba. Now you know hablaba, compraba, presentaba, cancelaba, etc. You know all the are verbs essentially. And this is so powerful because this is the difference between the guy who gets fluent and doesn't. How are you going to get fluent when there are thousands of variations and you're expected to memorize all of them and you don't even know them in context, in native speech, and in every single variation? How are you supposed to get fluent like that? You're not. That's why people study for 8 years in school and never get fluent in the language. Whereas, if you just know a few rules, if you just know the why do we say tiene, but we say tenemos? Like, why is it tenemos instead of tienemos, right? It seems irregular, but it's not. There's rules to it. This is the issue with regular teaching of grammar. If you just know the what and the where and you just memorize it, you're not going to understand why it happens. And when you don't understand why it happens, you're not going to be able to reuse the framework over and over again, which means you're not going to be able to use what you just learned. And then when they ask you, ¿qué haces? ¿Qué te gusta hacer? You're just like, I've never heard that one before. Do you mean? You don't know it because you haven't learned it. You haven't understand the different rules in Spanish. And the worst thing is, the tendency most people have is to not understand the why, to not understand that. Everyone wants to memorize because it's so much easier, right? It's so much easier to scroll on Anki than it is to, do a little research. And granted, these rules aren't very taught. That's why I'm so grateful that he did teach the rules in language transfer and didn't tell you to memorize them. So we went to the sentence before, estaba hablando con ella, right? So the framework for understanding this would be first to find out, okay, what do they mean firstly, okay? We gotta know what they mean. For some of them, there's no more whys, like there's no more to explain. Con just means with. There's a little to explain with, for example, it's a preposition, which means the word after isn't going to be with her, it's not gonna be con la, but it's gonna be with she, con ella. Right, that's one, actually, what am I saying? That is one why. So firstly, there's one thing, you want to understand why it's con ella instead of con la, right? It should be con la, with her, but it's con ella. So boom, even there's another why to understand. Let's take hablando, okay? Understanding even that concept. When do we use hablando, like when do we use estar plus hablando versus using just the regular tense? Because if I said, te veo, it can also mean I am seeing you, but I'm not saying te estoy viendo. So again, it's understanding why, it's understanding the differences. It's When you don't have an understanding, a clear rule to when certain things happen, then you just get confused and you get caught up in this giving up like form of, I don't know it, I have to memorize it. Especially with irregular verbs. Even with this thing of like, okay, it becomes, poder becomes puedo or puedes or puede, but it becomes podemos. Oh, I just gotta memorize it, it's irregular. No, you don't. Because you wanna understand, why does poder even split the puedo? Because the stress is on the O. Because when you say, for example, hablo, the stress is on the A, right? The stress is on the beginning. Hablo. You don't say hablo, because hablo would mean something else. You have to say hablo. In the same way you say poder. It should be podo. And the rule here is, the Y, is that if it's that the beginning vowel, if it's O or E, then it can split. And this splitting can happen a lot of times, like it's very common. And the O splits to UE, and the E splits to IE. So it would be puedo, for tener it would be tiene, but it should be tene, right, from tener, but it's tiene, because it splits. Knowing that, if we look at, for example, hablamos, the stress is not at the ab. You don't say hablamos, right? You say hablamos. So because the stress is on the amos, is that beginning vowel going to split? No. So in this case, with podemos, it should be podemos because the O is protected because the stress. So do you see, there's a why, there's a reason why that happens. There's a rule to it. And when you don't understand the rule, you're left to guess and memorize. And when you're left to guess and memorize, you're never gonna get fluent because you don't know what's going on. The next time someone uses that same concept in a different context, you're gonna be confused. And that's why I believe this framework works so well. And I know that explaining extremely well because I literally used it on myself and it works. Anytime I ever explain any of these concepts to anyone, they go, whoa, it just clicked. I was actually, even yesterday, I was on a coaching call with this client and we were talking about how the present tense, if I said hablo, it means I speak or I'm speaking. It can mean both. And then he was confused about the difference between estoy hablando and hablo because both of them means I'm speaking. And I was explaining that the difference is estoy hablando is specifically in the moment you are speaking right now. And then I explained to him that usually native Spanish speakers, they're gonna use the other tense. They're gonna say hablo as I'm speaking in the sense that they are not speaking right now, but they're gonna speak in the future or something like that. And then it clicked to him because, so first I explained it with the example of saying me ves. In Spanish, if you want to say, are you seeing me? Do you see me? You wouldn't say, me estás viendo? No, you would say, me ves, in the same way you'd say, me escuchas. And then when I told him that, it was like, oh, it just clicked because his other coaches had told him, like, oh, me escuchas, are you hearing me? Do you hear me? And so, even there, I explained him the why behind, for example, so why a native would say that. And then he realized, that's why. And now, the next time he ever says, for example, I'm eating it, okay, he's not gonna say lo estoy comiendo or estoy comiéndolo, because that's not as native, even though it might be correct. He would say lo como, which is what natives would say. And that's the sauce, that's the secret. He took a concept, he understood the why, he understood the what and where. He knows what escuchar means, he knows what estar means. You probably know the what, and you probably know the where, but you don't know why the where happens. Why is te in this position? Because of a rule. That is the why that we need to understand. The third W is the most important, that is the why. And most people don't understand it, and it is the reason they don't understand Spanish grammar. If you're interested in coaching, check the description. I hope this video helped you, bro, and stay humble.